bring the jury. All right. Yes, sir. The objection is sustained. You may proceed.
You're familiar with the Criminal Justice Academy training program for new recruits, are you?
Yes, sir.
And are you familiar with the various policies and procedures at the North Charleston Police Department governing patrol operations and review?
Yes, sir. I mean, I would have to review some of them at the same time and get very specific.
Let me show you the what's been marked as Defendants 97, and I ask you if you can identify that.
Yes, there's the early warning system for personnel.
And this is the policy you referenced earlier,
Yes, sir. In the early warning system.
which is a objective, non-subjective analysis of the use of force.
Right. Yes, sir.
Your Honor, we ask that this be introduced into evidence as Defendants 97.
We object. 2005.
Yes, sir.
One more question. This policy has been in effect for 11 years.
I have to look. It was issued in 2005. Yes, sir. It's still in effect right now in the manual.
And it was in effect on April 4th, 2015.
Yes, sir. And the new things were, they're reviewed annually, and the only difference would be is the next copy you would see would have Chief Dricker's name on it.
So the name of the chief has changed since this.
Yes, sir.
Now, again, we ask
Okay, that's it. It is admitted over objection.
Thank you. Is there also a policy, and I refer to defendants 83, that's the marker in the courtroom, but are you familiar with the use of force policy?
Yes, sir.
And does it prohibit warning shots?
Oh, yes, sir.
And does it prohibit trying to hit somebody in the ankle or fire in the neighborhood where somebody's running, but in terms of lethal force?
Say that one more time?
Is there any, is it permissible, it's not permissible to fire a warning shot?
No, sir, it's
How
not.
about to wing somebody? Hit him in the ankle?
If you could shoot him in the ankle, I mean,
What is the policy in terms of?
there is nothing that says shoot somebody in the ankle.
What is the policy in terms of training where if you use lethal force, where is this shot?
You shoot center mass to stop the threat. Center mass being on the chest area
And
of
the
the-
purpose of that is to what?
to stop the threat, and that's the most effective means, and it's the largest portion of the body to shoot at. Just try to hit somebody in the ankle, I'm not that good.
Are you familiar with Defendants 82 Mark for Identification, which is the Criminal Justice Academy training on use of force?
Not the new stuff.
Are
'Cause I
you
went a long
familiar
time.
at all with the training regarding sensory perception in critical incidents?
No, sir.
Do you have any personal experience with a critical incident?
Yes, sir, I've had several critical.
And be careful, right? In situations which employ lethal force,
Yes, sir.
that you were personally involved.
Yes, sir.
How did that affect your ability to recollect exactly what took place during the
Well,
critical?
obviously, is a critical incident, you're stressed out. You're hyper-focused, you're stressed out. And immediately after, when you say, tell me what happened, when I went to recall the events, I had distances messed up, placement messed up, my time was all off, and I would have went to blows with you, the person saying, no, that's not what happened, we was there with you, and that's not really what happened. And actually, on my incident, I was right, but like 2 weeks later, when I had come down, and when they interviewed me again, and said, look, this is what happened, dude, they videoed this. It was like, oh, yeah, I guess you are right.
Have you ever received any training on the effects of critical incident amnesia?
No, sir.
Beg the court's indulgence for a moment, please. Just briefly. Following a critical incident in which a suspect is shot, what is the policy with respect to handcuffing?
You handcuff them. You still don't know if that person is completely incapacitated. You don't know if that person does have a weapon or has some kind of item on him that they could destroy of evidentiary value. So you handcuff them to secure them.
Having experienced a critical incident, give the jury a flavor, if you will, without going into detail about what you were involved in, how quickly things can spin out of control.
Things in this job can spin out of control. It can flip a switch in a second. You're talking to somebody on the street, and you're there talking to them, and you think everything's going, but you don't know what's going on in somebody else's head, and they're in some other reality, and the next thing you know, you're on the ground fighting. That's the best way I can explain it. It's just unpredictable.
And when you're on the ground fighting, how does that affect your thought process?
you want to go home. I mean, we're just like anybody else. I mean, we're not really superhuman or anything. I want to go home to my family, my grandchildren, and you start thinking when somebody's fighting you and they're on top of you, oh my God, this is for real. This ain't television. This is for real. Why would he be fighting me? He's trying to hurt me. And you don't know how far that person's going to go. So you don't know what to do. I mean, you've got to get out of that situation. Some officers don't get out of that situation, and you'll die.
I'll answer any questions across the board.
Ms. State?
You mentioned one critical incident you were in. You have a lot of experience interviewing defendants who have been involved in critical incidents, don't you?
Yes, ma'am.
You were in detectives, done violent crimes, worked with us, right? And you have not held back interviewing defendants who have been involved in critical incidents, have you?
No.
I mean, you go for it because they are the witness to what happened.
You mean the suspect?
The suspect.
Yes.
Who oftentimes later becomes a defendant, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And in interviewing suspects to shootings, you do that as quickly as possible so that you can get as much information to lead you through your investigation, do you not?
As soon as we can get them in custody, yes.
And you don't wait 24 hours to see if they've come down from the shooting before you interview them, do you?
No, because, no. I can't leave them on the street for 24 hours. They may shoot somebody else.
Well, they might just be a witness.
They could be, but if they're a suspect, I thought you were saying just suspect.
I did say suspects, but let's talk about witnesses. People who have witnessed incidents, that can be traumatic as well, right?
Sometime, yes.
When people who have not been trained, people who do not have any experience with guns, watch somebody get shot, it can have a dramatic effect on them.
It can and it can't, both ways.
Yeah, I mean, people are just different. It
Right.
depends. Some people it doesn't affect at all, right?
Right, some of the people in the neighborhoods, there's like a day in the neighborhood, a day in the hood, as they
Right.
say.
And so you feel all right interviewing them, but ones who are hysterical, you still try to get information from them to use
yes.
it to further your investigation.
Yeah, you try, and if it doesn't work, you don't push them, you just back off.
Now, Detective Jellicoe, you don't back off very easily, do you?
I don't.
Okay. And when you talk about handcuffing suspects, it's no secret that you are trained when a suspect is down until you have the full assessment of their condition, you handcuff them.
That's correct.
And because you don't know how dangerous they might be, right?
Right.
And sometimes even then, you take precautions even when they're handcuffed, because you don't know what somebody can do after they're handcuffed sometimes, right?
Right. You watch them. I mean, you just can't handcuff them and walk away. You got to watch them.
Shouldn't walk away from them.
I wouldn't walk away from. I'd be in a general area.
Okay. And you shouldn't throw another weapon down beside them, should you?
I don't know what you mean.
Should you throw a weapon down
Like a
beside a
gun?
suspect? Like a gun? Sure.
I wouldn't do that.
Okay. And you wouldn't throw a taser down beside one of them either, would you?
Well, if I was involved in a critical incident,
I didn't ask you that. I asked you whether or not it was a good idea to
Well,
throw
I
a
mean,
weapon down by a suspect.
I understand you, Madam Solicitor, but that's like apples and oranges. I mean, if I'm the policeman and I know how police think, that you got that equipment, that taser costs over $1,000. You're not gonna let that thing out your sight.
And that's why when you go pick it up, you put it in your holster.
I would put it,
Right.
unless the cords are all hanging out of it, it won't go back in the holster.
So if it had a bunch of strings and wires and what have you, when you picked it up, you put it in your holster to keep it safe.
If it had that, you ain't gonna be able to get it back in the holster.
If it didn't have that, you
Yeah, I
put it
would.
in your holster.
I would, some people may not.
So in your training, is it customary to pick up a taser from one area of use and to throw it down by a suspect?
I don't know if that's ever addressed anywhere.
Okay. But it would make good common sense that you wouldn't do that, wouldn't it?
A lot of things would make common sense, man. If you stressed out and you just shot somebody.
And one of the reasons that you have training sort of train people from reacting to stress?
I don't follow that question.
Well, when you do active shooter situations and shoot don't shoot situations, you're trying to train officers not to react as,
I've never been through active shooter training.
because you were retired at that
Right,
point.
so that's the reason I never went to it. And then they stopped having, but I know, I have went through the scenario-based training,
And what is scenario-based training?
where we have different scenarios. The scenarios are not set up, like, this is on the annual in-service training. They're not set up as failure scenarios, like, there's a win-win in all scenarios. So we want the officer to know if he does the right thing, he can win and walk away, because that's what you want to do in the real life. When you go to the scenario training, we use like simulations. Do I need to explain that?
Sure.
Simulations is a like paint-filled bullet. It can't kill you, but it stings, and it'll leave paint on you. And we wear masks and everything, and we go into a situation, and like I would be one of the instructors, and I would take two officers, and I say, here's all I just give them a brief thing. There's somebody you're doing a traffic stop on, they're in this car right here. They give you a driver's license, registration, blah, blah, blah. And on the front seat, when they walk up and they're going through the traffic stop, there's a shotgun on the front seat. And we want to see what they're going to do. Because in itself, it's not illegal to have that shotgun on the front seat. You have guidelines for pistols and all, but we want to see if the officer pulls them out the car and handcuffs them, that kind of thing. But if they go too far in that scenario, the other passenger in the car will try to get out and interfere, and then it could get into a deadly force situation.
So you have officers kind of role play,
Right.
okay, in those situations. And I believe you testified regarding training that in your view, training could be better at North Charleston.
I never talked about training.
You haven't talked about training? I'm sorry, I must have confused your testimony with the prior officer. What is your assessment of training at North Charleston?
Well, we can always do better in everything. Right now, we have firearms qualification. That's different in training.
It's different than the scenario-based stuff that you
Right,
were
well,
just
we're
talking
talking about real gun, real ammunition, real bullets. We don't have that. Now, I know you can only get so realistic with pistol training, you know.
And because you can only get so realistic, you and your supervisory team, you are relying on officers' judgment, right?
I couldn't hear
You're
somebody call.
relying on officers' judgment.
No, I didn't hear the first part of the conversation.
The first part of the question was because you can only do so much with scenarios. I mean, you can't use real bullets, you can't use real criminals. Because of that, there is a certain amount of reliance on officers just using good judgment.
Yes,
And there is a certain amount of reliance on officers using their discretion.
yes.
Okay. And when looking at those matters, I believe Mr. Savage cautioned you that language is important, but when you're looking at use of force matters, isn't it true that the reasonableness of the action is important?
You mean
Reasonableness
of my action or their action?
of your action. How reasonable you're being. That's
Yes,
important.
you'd have to put it with the scenario, like I stop a car and
I'm not asking you to judge different scenarios as to what's
No,
reasonable.
I'm saying
but
it's reasonable, I'm gonna act reasonable as far as
the
they act.
situation.
Right.
Right.
Their actions depend on my actions.
And what you are charged with doing is actions that are reasonable and are
Right.
necessary,
Right,
especially with use of force. It's got to
Yes.
be reasonable and it's got to be necessary to
Mhm.
stop the threat.
right.
Right? And the threat that you are charged with eliminating must be immediate. An immediate threat to you or someone else, correct?
Immediate, and what is your definition of immediate?
What is
That's
your
it.
definition of immediate?
Well, if I am shooting at somebody and they're running around a corner or a tree, and I have not searched them prior or anything like that, I don't know that they're stopping to get a defensive stance against me, and they're gonna come back around the corner with a gun.
And
So,
that's one of the reasons you mentioned that you stay one threat level ahead.
I try to,
You
try to.
because you can always back off.
You can always, you can do anything, you can
Said-
run.
You said if you need to, you can come back down.
Right, if you need to,
If
right.
you need
If
to.
you have time, you could come back down.
If you have time to reassess,
Right,
you can come back down. And when you have these morning meetings, you mentioned that y'all do updates about the various areas that your team may be patrolling, and you get updates about what's going on there the night before, right?
yes.
And you mentioned that you've been with North Charleston forever, but you have never been to the area where the shooting was?
Not as a direct area, no,
So you weren't familiar with the Yellow Brick Road or any of that?
no,
Have you ever heard of it before this case?
no.
Okay. But in those meetings, the reason, you basically described kind of a check-in.
Mhm.
I mean, as a supervisor, you're checking in with the person that you're supervising.
Yes, the squad meetings.
What?
The squad meetings, is that what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, I believe you testified, is that you need to have the officer there with you mentally.
Right, physically and
You need to
mentally.
make sure that they don't have a whole bunch of stuff going on so that they can make good decisions mentally.
Right,
Because you can't train them for every scenario.
no ma'am,
You've got to count on their judgment and their discretion.
that's correct.
Regarding the investigation, I believe you talked about this early warning system with internal affairs, or what is it called now? Not internal affairs,
Office of Professional Standards.
the OPS, Officer of Professional Standards. The information about each use of force is entered by the officer who was involved, as reported to the supervisor, as entered it and reported to the OPS.
No.
Okay, where's the information come from?
The sergeant, whoever's the supervisor, goes to the incident. What did you do? I did X, Y, and Z. He
From the
fills,
officer.
right, he gets the,
Except from the
right,
officer.
he gets the first thing, then he collects any kind of evidence that, like in-car cameras, and now we have the body-worn cameras, he collects all that. Then he looks at the incident, looks at what happened.
And
He
the
write,
body-worn cameras are relatively new.
right, that's a new thing. And then they do an interdepartmental form. It's a different,
Who does that form?
the sergeant.
Okay. And then he takes it to OPS at some point?
No.
Okay.
The form is filled out with, it's a place for the incident, it's a part for, conclusions, were there any violation of department policy, you have to cite it and all. Then, and who was involved and all, then it goes to the lieutenant. It's like a package going to the lieutenant. He reviews it. If the sergeant says, I don't see any policy violation, the lieutenant reviews it. He goes to the same motion. He may see something, may not. He writes on whatever, and he sends it up. It goes to the captain, goes all the way up through the chain. When it gets to the Office of Professional Standards, they enter it into this early warning computer system.
Okay. And what the OPS folks enter is all dependent on all of those layers within
Right.
the department.
Unless they stop it when they get it and say, ooh, we have a problem with this. And then they start an investigation. So, and I'm sure at some point in there, it would probably enter too. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. And so the objectivity of that software system comes into play when?
I have to read I can tell you really quick. It says when they get so many complaints, 2 complaints within 6 months, it's alerted. If they get 5 use of force in 3 months, it's alerted.
So it's, the system is triggered solely by the number,
Right.
and that's the objectivity.
Right, yeah, when you get so many, then it goes to, it triggers it, they take it to the bureau commander of that area. Like if I'm in detectives, it'd go to mine. If a uniform, it goes to that person.
Let me make sure I have one of your answers correct regarding the use of deadly force. You mentioned a scenario where a suspect is running away and you hadn't had an opportunity to search him.
Right. If I hadn't had an opportunity to search him.
You are not testifying that that alone gives you the authority to use deadly force, the fact that you hadn't searched somebody.
No, that's one of the little hairs that go up on, hey, I don't know what he might, right, I don't know what that person's gonna possibly come back on me on. And after I've chased him, for whatever reason, I've chased him, why is he running, why is he fighting me, after being tased, why is he still trying to, you see what I mean? So all that alerts me. And if I understand from what I've been hearing, if this thing was 1.49 seconds, that's like a sneeze.
Let's talk about what you've been hearing. You mentioned in your direct testimony that there were some numbers on use of force that you've been hearing in the courts, and now you testified that.
Well, I hear 1 through, I've been hearing it today and all, 1, 2, 3, and that's not how I remember it. I don't remember it like, I remember command presence. I remember, that's how I remember it.
But the 1.49 seconds hadn't been testified to today, right?
I probably heard it on the news.
I heard it on the news.
I could have heard it in the police department, people chattering around.
You are aware there's a sequestration order?
No, I'm not.
You aren't?
Mm-mm.
So have you been watching the trial?
Mm-mm.
Have you been talking with other witnesses about the trial?
No, because I'm it.
But somehow you know about 1.49 seconds, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And you know about the numbers and the level of force being talked about in the courtroom.
Yes.
That's all, Your Honor.
Anything further? You may step down. Let me call your next witness.
Slager.
Do you swear affirm the testimony you shall give the court and the jury in the trial of this case to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Please state your first and last name and spell your last name loudly, clearly, for the record.
It's Victor Buskirk, Buskirk.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, what's your name?
Victor.
Morning, Lieutenant.
Good morning. How are you, sir?
Good. Uniform indicates North Charleston Police Department.
Yes, sir.
Difference from the last witnesses, yours is gold.
Correct. I'm a lieutenant.
And tell us a little bit about the difference. What does that mean?
Well, I'm actually a supervisor over 2 sergeants. I have 6 teams that I supervise as a lieutenant, so that would make it different than what Jellicoe is doing.
All right. If you would tell us a little bit about your background, starting, just go back a little bit before your law enforcement career. Give us an orientation of how you got into law enforcement, what you did.
Sure.
Maybe high school.
So I graduated from Garrett in 1988. I went on to do some electrical work. I did commercial electrical. From there, I really wanted to pursue law enforcement. Before that, I got married in 1990. And I will say I've celebrated my 26th wedding anniversary the other day, so I'm pretty proud of that. Went on to Department of Corrections in 1994, and that's really where I started my law enforcement career. From there, I rose to the rank of a sergeant. I was over a few corporals there. And then in 2000, I was offered the opportunity to go to North Charleston, and I jumped on that because I really wanted to be on the road, interacting with the community more than I really was doing as a Department of Corrections officer. So in 2000, I started with North Charleston, graduated from the academy in 2001, did about 2.5 years on the street as a patrol officer. I was on day shift. I was fortunate enough to get that shift. And after about 2.5 years, I was able to go to the speed team. That's selective police enforcement to enhance and deter. So we were more of a street levels team, street level crime. We focused a lot on prostitution and drugs. And through that, I did a little bit of the technical stuff. I wired up our informants. I wired up our vehicles for undercover buys. And then that kind of helped me segue into narcotics because then I became the tech guy, for lack of a better term, in narcotics. So I would wire up our informants and vehicles. I worked a couple of cases, but that was just on downtime. And then from there, I went back to the street after a few years of doing, the special operations. It kind of wears on you a little bit because it's very high pace. So I wanted to do something a little bit different. Plus, for my family, speed and narcotics was kind of trying on your schedule. Always on call, always, coming out on the whim. So I went back to the road. I worked the road for a little bit. And from that point, I got promoted to corporal in 2009. From there, I went on to our detective division, and I was only there a very short stint because in 2010, I got promoted to sergeant. So from there, I went to our central bureau. I was the evening central sergeant, which was kind of challenging because that's a very busy area of the city, is central, especially on evenings. There's a lot of responsibility there. So from there, I went on to take over our saturation unit, which was kind of as part of our neighborhood impact section that we had, where they focused on neighborhoods that were plagued with violent crimes. So they looked at what are the neighborhoods that have the most violent crime, and we're going to put officers dedicated to those neighborhoods. That's where they worked. From there, I ended up getting promoted to lieutenant in 2012, and then I was the night shift watch commander in 2012. That's where I supervised Michael. And then from there, I've remained at the lieutenant position, and some positions have gone away, so they kind of shuffle me into a new position. And so right now I'm over our neighborhood investigation section, which is part of the detective bureau.
So you've had a pretty broad experience in terms of the patrol division.
Yes, sir.
At North Charleston. Do you have any experience with the training in North Charleston?
I'm a basic instructor with the department. So the difference between a basic instructor and a specific skills instructor is, as a basic instructor, it's a little bit more training, and then you're able to develop lesson plans. So it's just a little bit more in-depth training for that. So I'm a basic instructor, and I specialize mostly in the active shooter realm of it. And most recently, I started doing civilian response to active shooter events. I'm kind of giving them the, be proactive during these events. And so I've had training through ALERT, which is Advanced Law Enforcement for Rapid Response Training, and that's kind of the core of where I started with active shooter training out of Texas, and Texas State University sponsors that. And between then and now, I've gained 2 other instructor level certifications, and it's all pretty much the same basis or background foundation. Just some of the methods are a little bit different whenever you start deploying tactics.
So as a basic instructor, that means that you've been approved by the Criminal Justice Academy in certain areas of instruction, is that correct?
Well, no, once you're either basic or specific skills, you can train, you can go ahead and teach them from a lesson plan. So if they pulled me and said, hey, we want you to teach, something that's not a specialized thing like ethics. If they want me to teach ethics, then I could go in, look at the lesson plan, bring myself up to speed with what's required for that lesson plan, and then I could teach it. Active shooter is a little bit different because that is kind of like a specialty. Some of the courses, they require for you to be able to teach that you have to have a certain instructor certification.
Lieutenant, in your absence, the jury has heard a little bit about active shooter and active shooter training, and the philosophy of how to respond by law enforcement first responders has changed over the years. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir. A lot of that changed from Columbine, and just because officers kind of surrounded and held that perimeter at Columbine, and all the children that died while the officer was on scene. So they realized we need to change that, and so now we really push them. If people are dying, we want you to go. We call it direct to threat. Pretty much, you need to get in there and stop people from dying instead of waiting for SWAT to get there.
Does the North Charleston Police Department train their men and women in active shooter responses?
Sure. We've had some active shooter training that officers have been able to go to like FLETC for, and that's mostly the instructors to try to get them up to speed.
Time out. We don't know what FLETC is.
I'm sorry, Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. It's a federal site that trains, and so our officers have been allowed to go there to receive some of their training on active shooter response. But we really felt it was important for our whole department to go through active shooter training. Just because it's a different animal, for lack of better terms. The old surround and hold doesn't work anymore. We got to get officers in. So things change, and we really wanted to get our officers up to speed with that. So in 2013, we started with putting all the officers from the rookiest officer, the one just out of the academy, they would go all the way up to the chief of police, went through this active shooter training that we put on. And it was a one-day course.
This is a course that's not in the shooting area. What do you call that? Where you go and you qualify?
Just on the range?
Yes.
No, sir. We set it up. What we did, this particular training that we put them through in 2013 was we set up, we call it the cone house or glass house. We set up cones, had them do specific movements as if it was a hallway breaking off into rooms. So we had the cone set up like that. That was so we could see what they were doing, as well as the other officers could see, and they could learn from maybe their mistakes or some of the good entries that they did, so they could learn from that. So we had a PowerPoint in the first part of the morning. Then we went on to the old Navy Hospital where we set up the cone course. After we did that, after lunch, we headed to an abandoned school, and so we did it inside of a school setting.
In comparison to the regular training for a patrol officer, could you give us the difference of what they learn at the firing range and what they learn in active, I keep saying that, not duty, active shooter? Active
shooter training. Well, on the range, I mean, pretty much, we qualify once a year. So we go in, we shoot our 40 rounds, we qualify, and that's it. So with the active shooter, we're not using live ammunition. I mean, we're using, we call it simunitions. The first one that we did in 2013, we actually used paintball. It differs because they're actually moving. They're actually moving, they're engaging targets, live targets. They're engaging, we had role players, the other officers that weren't in that particular scenario at the time, they would act as role players, and so we would have them coming out like we would think an actual active shooter would look like, with people trying to get out of the area. Law enforcement is having to look at those role players coming at them, seeing are they friendlies, do they have a weapon? So they're having to scan all the time to look at what's going on, what's coming at them. And then once they do engage the target, they're moving, the suspect is moving, so there's a lot involved in it.
At the range, the position of the targets, are they what they call static, they don't move?
Right, so during a qualification, you know, say it starts off at the 3-yard line, the target's right in front of you, you're in a kind of a corral, and you shoot at the target. Once that volley is over, they'll move it, the target will move back maybe to the 5, and then you shoot at that. So it's never moving while you're shooting, it goes to each station, stops, and then you draw and fire.
And in terms of the officer who's being trained, is he in a static position, or is he on the ground, squatting, sitting, standing?
So the first few yard lines and things like that are just standing. At some point, I want to say it's like at the 15-yard line, they shoot from like a kneeling position to simulate that you're maybe using a barricade as cover. So you would lean forward, shoot, maybe lean back on your heels to simulate maybe having to shoot from behind cover. So that's the only time that you're really on your knees.
And the qualification is timed, the number of shots, or there's pressure to put on an officer to get your shots off in a specific time frame?
They are timed, yes, sir.
Is there, and you called that qualification,
Yes, sir.
is there training for patrolmen in North Charleston?
Training for what?
Firearms.
So the only way that I've experienced it, being able to get training that actually had me moving and shooting, was patrol rifle training. We have patrol rifle training. So we transition. Obviously, if we have a malfunction with our patrol rifle and it's rather close to the target, it doesn't make sense to really try to clear a malfunction on your patrol rifle. We call it slinging. You sling your rifle and you draw your firearm, and then you would do engage the target with your firearm. We have lateral movements during patrol rifle, but that's only for a select number of officers that are able to have the patrol rifle. Our whole department is not outfitted with patrol rifles.
Other than that, is there any other training for a patrolman in North Charleston?
Not for actual firearms training, not in-house. Again, I'm fortunate because I was picked early on with our old chief, Chief Zumalt. He said that you're going to be the active shooter instructor. We want you to go out, get this training, come back and teach our folks. So I've been fortunate. I've been able to go outside of North Charleston to receive some of this training where we do shoot and move. But if I was just a typical officer, no.
So are you familiar at all with Officer Slager?
I am. Officer Slager worked for me in 2013, or 2013, 2012.
Are you familiar with either Officer Slager or that level of officer, patrolman, who does not carry a long-arm rifle? Are you familiar with the training they get, or the lack of training in terms of they don't get any?
I would say at that level, you don't have a patrol rifle, you wouldn't receive any other type of training that would be shooting and moving type training.
So qualification, yes. Training, no.
Correct.
And active shooter training is to give experience to patrolmen how to react if there is a hostage takeover at a school or at a mall or something of that type. Is that correct?
Not really a hostage taking, because obviously tactics are different for a hostage situation. We're talking about active shooter. Somebody is actively shooting, killing people. That's the type of training that the officers received.
So in an active shooter scenario, the person that is the patrol officer responding would know before they get there that there is an active shooter.
During training, it's all set up on, they realize they're there for active shooter training, yes, sir.
And what type of equipment in the active shooter training do they wear? What type of uniform and whatnot?
Well, they wear BDUs typically. That's what we call our training uniform. They can wear their duty belt, but obviously for safety reasons, we have them clear everything out. They don't bring knives with them. They don't bring magazines with them. We don't want any accidents happening. So it's pretty much a stripped duty belt. They wear their ballistic vest. They also wear a head piece to protect their face from either the simunitions that we transitioned to later on or the paintball.
they engage in pre-simulation, is that it, simulation? Pre-simulation stress?
I'm not clear on the.
You try to get them stressed out before they engage in.
Sure. So we try to make these as lifelike as possible. It's impossible to make it 100%, but we want them to experience their adrenaline. We want them to experience somewhat of that fear factor that you're going to face going to that kind of a scenario. So we do incorporate some loud screaming. I actually play it through an audio recorder, loud screaming, crying. We have them staged at the bottom of a stairwell before they come up, and we don't really have them run up the stairs or anything else because obviously they have the headgear on, so we don't want accidents, but they at least go up one flight of stairs into the upstairs training area. We kind of yell at them, get them amped up, start screaming out, people are dying, you got to get in there. What we're trying to do is increase their heart rate, because we know that if their heart rate is increased, there's certain things that happen to the body. And we want them to experience that so they can fight through that. And if they experience it enough, we hope that that's something that they can kind of acclimate themselves to, knowing, okay, I can operate and function well even though I'm stressed.
And because the stress, based on your training through the Texas University, the different heart rates are an indicator of the type of stress you're experiencing. Right.
So right now I'm probably like in condition yellow. My heart rate's a little bit elevated just because I'm a little bit nervous sitting up here. But what we talk to the officers about is a good heart range or heart rate to have is between 120 and 140. We call that kind of your combat ready, because the blood is really pumping to your major muscle groups, makes you faster and stronger and things like that. Well, if you allow it to go beyond that, say 140 and above, you start getting into like a condition gray or black. And so auditory exclusion starts kicking in where you don't hear things anymore. Tunnel vision, you get hyper-focused on like one object, one thing, and so...
Your Honor, I have no objection to this testimony to an expert witness, but he's not qualified as an expert in this area. We also go into that part of the place that we said.
Mr. Savage.
You are a training officer, and what you're detailing is the training that you provide to the officers at North Charleston.
That is correct.
And that's part of your regular duties.
Correct.
So, Your Honor, this is about what happens in training. This is not anything beyond.
I have no problem with him testifying as to what training they're presenting, but when he's talking about when your heart rate gets to this, when your heart rate gets to that, that's has to be based on scientific evidence, and as I've not heard of these science.
Let's pose another question and let's proceed.
As far as the training goes, is stress an ingredient as part of that? You try to put people in stressful situations.
Yes, sir.
And is that because they react differently when they're sitting in a chair and when they're running 200 yards and engaged in a fight and that sort of thing?
Yes.
Even members of the jury would be different, right?
Correct.
Based on the stress.
Correct. I'm different under stress.
So all this is done to try to get the mindset of how officers who may go a whole career without an active shooter, try to get an idea how to respond.
That is correct.
And in that training, how many, is it a week or less than a week?
This particular active shooter training that I'm speaking of was a one-day course. So we did the PowerPoint and the cone course in the morning part, and then the actual scenarios we had in the afternoon.
And you would employ different, when we say scenarios, what does that mean, scenario?
So we would set up, I hate to say scenario, we would set up an event to where we would have, like one that we had was where the officers, as they came around the corner, they would see a subject there with a baseball bat arguing with another subject, and what they received before going into that scenario or that event would be, there's disturbance at the school, disgruntled parent showed up, and there's an altercation. That's what they would get. So they would come around the corner, and then they would see this, and then they would need to react appropriately to what was going on. So it kind of puts them in the real-life situation of what they might experience.
There are 3, 4, 5 different scenarios that you might use over a period of time.
There are. We have a whole group. So we tried to keep it limited, but I mean, we could get classes up to 30. Obviously, you're not able to send all 30 in one scenario at one time, so you kind of break it up into groups. So we tried to get it no more than 4, because we start thinking about officer response. You're probably not going to have more than 4 officers showing up at the scene at the same time for like an active shooter event. So we limited those to 4. And so they would go through after they're done with that scenario, which the actual scenario itself would only last a couple of minutes. I mean, actual being under stress and having to actually engage, you're talking about maybe a minute at the most on some of them.
So all-day training, the stress period is a minute.
Probably per scenario at the most. I mean, you're talking about probably for the whole training day, the officers are put under stress-related training to actual scenario-type training. Maybe a total of 5 minutes is about the limit.
And that's the extent of the North Charleston Police Department's firearms training other than the qualification itself.
As far as for active shooter training, it is.
And how often would an officer in North Charleston today receive active shooting training?
Well, after we did the training in 2013 into 2014, we were able to come back during our annual in-service mandatory training, some people call AIM training, and we were able to set up scenarios during that to try to expand on what they had already learned. So we gave them kind of the basics, the formations, how to respond, and so we wanted them to see that now it's kind of a thinking game as well. It can go from an active shooter to a hostage, and so they have to change whenever that changes. So we put them through that training during AIM training, and again, split the groups up into halves. So during the morning time, half of that class would be with us doing active shooter training. The other half would be doing maybe vehicle stops, pedestrian stops, and after lunch, we would flip. So again, the same type of scenarios and the same amount of time under stress. Those are really the only 2 formalized times that we've done it. We did it a few years ago, I would say maybe in 2011 or so, to where we brought some a day shift, but just getting manpower, because that was a 2-day course, getting manpower for a 2-day course was not feasible.
And that would be recorded in the training record of any officer?
Correct.
Now, in those scenarios, is there a shoot, don't shoot component?
During some of them there are.
Would you tell the jury the circumstances of what the shoot, don't shoot scenarios are, and how did the students do?
Right. So the one that I talked about with the bat, we set that up because we wanted the officers to be able to evaluate what they were looking at and make critical decisions. So as the officers rounded the corner, the role player who played the victim knew to immediately run away from the subject with the bat and come towards the officers. Now it's just kind of the officer up against the subject with a bat. So the officers would give them verbal commands to drop the bat, not to come any closer. At times we would have the role player stay where they were at, stationary, and watch to see what the officers might do. One that really stood out in my mind during this particular training was we had one officer that his group came around the corner. They were completely separated. We had the role player with the bat staying stationary. Told him, don't move, just stay where you're at. That particular officer, he actually closed distance and at some point fired on the subject with the bat. So during the debriefing, we were asking, why did you shoot the subject with the bat? He said, well, he closed distance on me. He came out towards me. And we're like, no, that's not what happened. We were watching. You actually closed distance and shot the suspect because you closed distance. You felt he was a threat because you got too close. And it got to the point where it was almost an insubordination type thing. Very adamant that the suspect is who closed distance. Well, then I realized that the things that I was trained to become a trainer and active shooter, talking about conditions that you go through, it appeared to me he had the time dilation, he had the tunnel vision. He wasn't experiencing the subject coming at him. He was actually moving towards him, but because he was under stress, he viewed it completely different. So he wasn't lying to me about what happened. He was telling me what he truly perceived happened. And so that's why, it didn't become an insubordination thing, because I quickly realized, okay, he was under stress, and that's what he perceived to happen.
So that's why you induce stress?
It is.
Any other scenarios or situations? I've heard the rumor of one called Mary. What is that?
All right, so Mary is a scenario that's set up. The officers come in, and the only information that they're given is that there is a disgruntled spouse on the school grounds. It's the teacher or the principal that's calling this in. Sometimes we say that he's got a gun, sometimes we don't. But there's a disgruntled spouse at the school during a teacher's workday, and that's all they have. So what happens is the officers come into the area, and they see a suspect, or at this point it's just an unknown, come out of a side room. He's got a gun at his side, and he's screaming, "Mary, where are you at? Mary, where are you at?" The officers are continuously giving him verbal commands, drop the gun. He's not responding to them. He's continually going from room to room looking for Mary. "Mary, where are you at?" And it gets to a point as he gets closer to the end of the hallway to where he starts verbalizing, "Mary, whenever I find you, I'm going to kill you." So at that point, the officers need to start thinking, do I need to shoot the suspect? The suspect never turns and faces the officers. The gun is merely by his side, but he's making these verbal threats, going from room to room looking for Mary. Well, if the officers don't realize that he's a threat and that they need to engage this threat, he gets to the final room, he walks in, and the officers will hear 2 gunshots. He kills Mary, and then he kills himself. So that's to let them realize that ability, opportunity, and jeopardy can exist, and you might have to actually engage somebody before they actually raise the weapon and shoot somebody. He's verbalizing, "Whenever I find you, I'm going to kill you." They need to intervene. They need to interject themselves in that. So some don't. Some allow them to get into the room, and then Mary's dead and the suspect's dead. And then what we'll do is we'll debrief, and we'll talk about what happened. And a lot of these we would have the whole class would go through and not shoot. And then we would explain what we were looking at, why we think that you should engage him before he gets to Mary. And all of them afterwards recognize that he is a threat, because once he finds Mary, he kills her.
So during those scenarios, do you give the officers who are being trained an opportunity to stop and go back and look at the training manual to figure out their next step?
No, sir. It's very fluid. We're pushing them. We're trying to get them to move.
On the street, split seconds to make a decision.
Sure.
And you try to do that in the training as well.
Try to make it as realistic as possible, so that would be correct.
And not everybody gets 100 when they're graded on their responses.
No, sir.
And they don't have the stress of a 200-yard run or a ground fight.
Correct.
Or being tased.
Correct.
Now, going back to the more general experience that you've had and the training that you have received as well as instructed, following a shooting, is it appropriate to handcuff the suspect?
To me, that's standard operating procedure. The suspect is a threat, regardless of whether I think the suspect is down and they're dead or not. We even train that in the active shooter scenarios. Once they engage the threat, we have them go and simulate handcuffing, because until they're pronounced dead, they're still an unknown threat to you at that point.
Because after the fact, you know that they're dead, but at the time when you're engaged in that, you don't know whether you've even hit them.
That'd be a fair statement, yes, sir.
And yelling out and telling somebody to put their hands behind their back after they've been shot, is that appropriate?
Sure. Given loud verbal commands, yes, sir.
And when somebody is non-compliant to presence and to verbal commands, taser, 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 and firing the taser, non-compliant at that point, there's a fight on the ground, non-compliant at that point. What's in the mind of a police officer as that is going on?
Calls for speculation. I think you can ask him what would go on in his mind.
The objection is sustained.
You have time to think out based on your training and experience, or does it just flow from the conduct of the suspect?
You have to base it off of what the suspect's doing at the time. Sure, you're going to rely on your training and experience, but the elevation of resisting, all that's going to play into how much more you have to step up.
And on the decision process for what level of force to use, is it Crane that it's based on the suspect's physical ability?
That is a
one of the
factor.
criteria?
That is a factor that's played into that.
So that if somebody is a weightlifter or a martial arts person, would that be part of the input on the level of force?
If I had prior knowledge of that, it would be, as well as during maybe an altercation, if I realized that they had, it appeared to me because maybe some moves or techniques that they were doing that they had that type of training, then that would obviously come into effect.
And on the officer's part, is it an ingredient that how he acts is based on whether he's by himself or with other officers around?
That has a bearing on it, as well as if there's more suspects. You're going to base that information or your tactics off of that.
What do you mean by that?
So if there's, if I'm going up against 3 individuals and I'm by myself, then obviously their ability to overpower me is increased. So I may have to step up a little bit with what I'm doing.
Supposing there's a traffic stop and there are more than one occupants of the car and there's a chase against one of the occupants.
That would affect my thoughts. I'm thinking, where is the other subject at?
Supposing that it was a traffic stop and you don't have an opportunity to Terry frisk or search them for weapons.
Obviously, I'm going to be thinking that as well. Are they armed? Because I haven't had a chance to maybe check them, search them.
And supposing if sometime during the fight or immediately thereafter somebody's running in the direction of a tree line.
Yeah, obviously, if they're running in the direction of a tree line, maybe I wouldn't be too concerned as far as, once they got in that tree line, maybe I wouldn't pursue. I don't know. I'd have to base it on what the infraction was, what I was doing at the time, but maybe not necessarily a tree line.
Could they use that for cover?
The officer or the suspect?
Suspect.
Sure, the suspect could use it as cover. Concealment, cover.
And if you hadn't checked them for weapons before that?
It could be a problem.
And of course, you're familiar with the CompStat areas and manpower requirements and that sort of thing.
Yes, sir.
And without going into all those details again, not that you've gone through them, but we've heard, has there been a change in
Well, and I don't get to experience that right now because I'm in a different bureau, but I know a memo did come out. So there was always an unwritten rule of minimum staffing, to where, you try to limit to 2 officers taking off at the same time. But here recently, a more formal memo directive came out, outlining minimum staffing.
Kindly answer any questions the prosecutor might have.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
By the state.
Good afternoon, Lieutenant Busker. Good
How are-
to see you again.
Yes, sir. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I believe, were you watch commander of Central?
Actually, watch commander of South and Central, and then certain days, whenever the other lieutenant was off, I would have the whole city.
Okay. And I believe, if I heard you right, that Central is busy, particularly in the evenings, you said?
Yes, sir.
And are we talking about Charleston Farms again? Or?
Just all of Central in general, but I mean, Charleston Farms is a busy community.
Right. And in terms of crime and things of that nature, certainly sometimes are worse than other times, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And night is one of the worst ones, correct?
Well, I mean, it kind of depends. It kind of depends.
Crime.
For violent crimes, I would say evening hours to late night.
Would you consider like 9:30 on a Saturday morning to be a high crime time?
On a Saturday morning?
Yes.
Possibly not.
And when we met before, we talked a good bit about active shooter training, and you rightfully are a very strong proponent of that.
Yes, sir.
And you, was it Chief Driggers that tasked you with this, or was it Zumwalt?
It was Chief Zumwalt tasked me with becoming an active shooter
Okay.
instructor.
And everybody in the department participated in it in 2013 in the day-long program, is that correct?
That would be correct.
And then everybody, I guess beginning the next year, the scenario-based part of it was continued as part of the annual Ames training for a half a day anyway?
Well, it was a whole day. Just the active shooter part was half of the class in the morning, the other half in the afternoon.
Okay, but I mean, wasn't it based on the scenario-based part of it, the shoot, no shoot kind of thing that you were?
Correct. We
talking
ran
about?
scenarios, correct.
Because it's good to put officers in that type of situation, is that correct?
As far as for the training,
Yes, for training and to make good decisions.
yes, sir.
Because you want your officers to exercise good judgment when they're under stress.
Correct.
Now, but that doesn't change the rules, does it? As to when you can use deadly force.
What do you mean by that?
I'm saying the stress does not actually change the rules as to when you can use deadly force, correct?
I would say it probably changes the perception of the officer. That's why we try to have them go under that stress. It's beneficial to have it more than just twice, just so you can experience it, you can start trying to regulate it, control it, bring your heart rate down.
I understand that, but it doesn't change the rules regarding the use of deadly force in terms of, has to be an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm to the officer or the public.
Right.
And let's talk about these scenarios a little bit. You mentioned one where the officers come around the corner and they see a guy with a baseball bat, the other person runs towards them,
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
And experimenting with different situations with that scenario. What if the person with the bat dropped it and ran away?
Well, then,
Away from the officer?
right. Well, then, if he ran away, obviously the officers I would probably pursue him.
Would you shoot him in the back?
If he dropped the bat and I saw that he dropped the
If he dropped the
bat,
bat and was running away?
no, if I saw him drop the bat and he ran away, then no, I wouldn't.
Okay. Have you ever heard of drop and draw? In terms of,
I never heard about Alabama orange juice until the other day, so no, sir.
and speaking of training things, that's something that doesn't change either, correct? Alabama orange juice in terms
Well,
of. when
I've
you
never
use-
heard that, so
when
it
do you-
was new for
But you
me.
have heard of ability, opportunity, jeopardy.
Correct.
That's kind of drilled into police officers, not just here, but I'm assuming everywhere.
Sure.
Because that is the criteria for using deadly force.
Correct.
And with meaning that the subject has to have the ability to cause immediate harm to the officer or the public.
Right. Right.
The opportunity to do that, correct?
Correct.
And either the officer or the public has to be in imminent jeopardy of death or serious bodily injury.
Correct.
In the scenario you testified to on direct where you were coming around the corner and the guy with the bat and the person without the bat ran toward the officer, and you had an officer approach the man with the bat and shoot. You had how many officers do that out of how many officers that went through that scenario?
I don't know a number. That one really sticks out in my head because of the argument that he had for it. But I'm sure that we had more than just one.
So you had more than just one shoot the guy with the bat?
Right. Now, that could be because the suspect started coming towards them. They perceived that threat.
I don't think anybody's going to argue with somebody coming towards you with a bat, you can shoot, is that correct?
Right. But we tried to encourage the officers to recognize that they can disengage. We even call drawing a line in the sand. You tell them, if you go past this point, you're going to force me to use force. Don't make me shoot you if you pass that line. So we try to get the officers engaged to make good decisions on that.
And you try to get them to make good decisions, correct?
Yes, sir.
And sometimes that decision is to disengage, correct?
Yes, sir.
For example, if you were to stop someone for a bad taillight with a person in a car, it is within, and that person just ran away from you. It is within policy to chase them, correct?
Yes, you can.
And it is within policy to even use a taser against them, correct?
At that point, I would say yes, because the sole reason for running wouldn't be, or tasing wouldn't be for running.
But that doesn't mean that that's the best course of action for that officer to take, is it?
Again, I think it would depend on the situation the officer's in, what their perception of it is.
Well, assuming, like I said, the officer stopped him, had the man's driver's license, had the man's vehicle, left his own cruiser unlocked and running to chase a guy that he knew that might not have had insurance on the car.
Right.
Certainly did not have a working tail light. You can chase that person, there's no question about that, correct?
And I've probably done it.
Yeah, but my question is that always the wisest thing?
Well, clearly there could be other options. There's always other options.
One option would be to mail him a ticket to his house, for that matter.
I doubt that. We don't do that. But I mean, again, it's what you're perceiving at the time. Is it normal for somebody to just bolt off running from a vehicle? So you're taking that into account. And as a police officer, I mean, we're wanting to stop the bad guys. And that to me would be a bad guy that I needed to stop.
That, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I'm
Right.
saying that sometimes that's not the best course, is it?
Not always.
And because police officers can escalate situations just like suspects, correct?
Again, Sure. I mean, you know, that's in human nature. We have the ability to do that. Yes, sir.
Exactly, because y'all are not any different than anybody else you encounter during the day.
I'm glad you said that. We're human too.
You are human too.
Yes, sir.
You have the same weaknesses and strengths of every other human,
Without a doubt.
correct?
Yes, sir.
And I may have asked you this, but getting back to the scenario that you told us about where the guy was arguing with you and telling you that the guy with the bat was coming at him when you obviously knew that that wasn't true.
Yes, sir.
That doesn't necessarily make what he did right, correct?
Not necessarily, no, sir.
In other words, you don't get a free pass based upon your perception, do you?
Well, you do not. However, that's why we put them through that training, is to hopefully start subjecting them to that type of stress. Unfortunately, I don't think we've had enough of that.
And it would be nice if everybody could get more training. I agree with you on
Without a doubt.
that. And the other scenario that you presented was the domestic situation where the guy with the gun going through the house looking for his wife.
It was going through a school, looking for his
Going
wife.
through school, saying he was going to kill his
To kill
wife.
her.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
But that was a situation, once again, where officer knew the subject was armed, correct?
Correct.
And the subject had communicated a threat to harm someone else.
Sure.
And I just want to make clear, because this has been alluded to a couple of times, it is not your testimony to this jury that you can shoot somebody just because you haven't had a chance to press them.
Of course, I never said that.
Okay, just wanted to be sure. I did want to ask you about one other thing that I forgot about. You mentioned something in your testimony about slinging your rifle or throwing your rifle behind you.
Just
or something
called
like
slinging it. You have a sling that's on the rifle, and that way you're able to maintain control of your rifle, stays on you if you had a
So
malfunction.
when you're not talking about slinging in the sense of throwing it, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. Just curious. Thank you very much, Lieutenant.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anything further? Yes, sir.
Lieutenant, your experience, personal experience and stuff you've heard out in the law community, law enforcement community, have you ever heard of anybody running from a brake light being out?
I have heard of people running for a brake light out, as far as that was the reason I stopped them. Now, did they run for that? Probably not.
That is my question.
Yeah.
People run when they're stopped, but it's not necessarily because of what they're stopped for.
Correct.
And have you been involved in foot chases yourself?
Yes, sir.
If somebody has taken possession of your taser and somebody is facing you and you're trying to disarm them from that taser, so you're actually touching each other, you then go the next level up.
I've been tased before, and I know what it's capable of doing. If I couldn't overpower them and they had my taser, then I might possibly shoot them as well. That's why I was exposed to the taser.
Because the taser can not just what it does to your body, but gives permission to the person using it to disarm you.
Yeah, if they were to drive stun my hand and I had a weapon, I would probably drop it. I mean, I would say 100% I would drop my weapon. Because I've been drive stunned and I've been hit with the probes.
With or without prongs?
I was struck with the prongs and then without.
And in both scenarios, he could have been disarmed.
During the probes, 100%. I was incapacitated for 5 seconds. I had no ability to do anything but lay there. Whenever they let off, though, I was able to function. Luckily, I didn't curse. I said amen afterwards. So I was proud of that. But during the 5-second probes, no. During the drive stun, as long as they're making contact, I'm not functioning well.
And you also indicated that your training encourages, at the ultimate moment, to warn the suspect, don't make me shoot.
That was one of the, kind of like I talked about with Mr. Durant, about drawing a line in the sand. You know, you give them those loud verbal commands. You know, if you cross that, you're going to make me, use force, don't make me shoot you. Verbiage of that nature.
Have you had an opportunity to listen to the audio tape, the enhanced audio tape of the incident involving Mr. Scott and Mr. Slager?
No, sir. I've had limited viewing of the video as well. I choose not to.
Thank you, Tim.
Yes, sir.
Anything further?
And as Mr. Savage asked you, certainly if someone, you being a police officer, if someone is coming at you with a taser, you are authorized to shoot, correct?
I feel like there are circumstances to where, yes, you could shoot them.
I think you, under any circumstances, you could shoot somebody with that. If they're coming at you with a taser, then I think under your policy, deadly force is authorized, correct?
I would say yes. I would say yes. I'm sure there's variables there, but yes.
But that assumes that they have the taser, correct?
Correct.
That they're coming at you, correct?
Right.
That the taser's not 8 feet behind you, correct?
True.
And also, you're familiar with the operation of tasers, correct?
Yes, sir.
Is a taser without a cartridge a threat to you at a distance?
What distance?
This distance?
If I'm going to try to take you into custody, it is. From this distance without a cartridge on it,
Even assuming I have a taser and I'm this distance from you and I'm running away from you, does that authorize you to shoot?
if I perceive that, if I have all that knowledge, then no. If I have all those facts that you just pointed out, and I know that for certain, then no.
I have nothing.
Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you, sir.
We're gonna break for lunch and reconvene at 2 o'clock. Please do not discuss the case. We'll break until 2.